Hi folks, so I want to talk hopefully briefly, although I know I always say that, I want to talk hopefully briefly about hitting the head with a sword. Okay, now that sounds like a strange thing to say by itself, but actually in historical fencing we have to consider the effects of weapons and why you hit certain parts of the body and what effect it might have on that part of the body when you hit it with a sharp sword. So it's a bit of a grim topic, but it's part of the study of historical combat, and it also links into forensic archaeology and a whole bunch of other interesting and more seemingly academic topics. So firstly, what I want to say is that in modern sparring and in whether people have come from a kendo background or Asian martial arts background or a European martial arts background, it's quite common against using blunt weapons or shinai or plastic weapons or whatever, against people wearing head protection, i.e. fencing masks or whatever, to aim at the top of the head. Okay? Now, I think this is a bad thing for two main reasons. Okay? Firstly, and I'll back it up with historical evidence in a minute, firstly, the top of the head is a hard bone object. Okay? Millions of years of evolution have meant that humans have actually very hard, thick skull to protect our brain, obviously. Whereas below this kind of helmet level, below here, we're actually much more fragile. Okay, so the first thing is that the top of the head is a hard, bony object. So it's not an easy target to attempt to cut through or to damage the brain through. Okay, now blunt force trauma can act very effectively through the brain, to the brain through the skull, by of course causing swelling or cracking the skull and causing an injury directly on the brain that way, by transferring a huge amount of blunt force. But what's interesting about swords, or one of the things that's interesting about swords, is they don't actually transfer much blunt force. Many of you watching this video will attest to this fact, that we spar with real swords that are blunt a lot of the time and take blows to our body. And we wear more or less protection in different regions of our body. And yes, a blunt sword in the head would hurt a lot. It may even knock you out. However, it doesn't actually transfer an awful lot of force, because with a sword, I'll just grab one at random, actually the point of balance of the weapon is quite close to the hand. Okay, so that enables you to have a very quick and nimble weapon that can deliver a sharp edge cut very quickly, but it doesn't actually deliver an awful lot of force up here compared to something like a baseball bat or a mace or a hammer. Okay, so something like a baseball bat will actually transfer far more blunt energy to someone's head than a sword will. What a sword is really there to do is cut. So bearing in mind that this is not good at blunt impact but is good at cutting, why would you aim at one of the hardest parts of the human body up here? Okay, so that's really the first thing I want to say. Why would you aim at a very bony thing? The second thing is, if you aim at the top of the head here, when people see something being swung at their head, their natural flinch reaction, unless they're used to training with fencing masks, which admittedly many of us are, but a normal person without a fencing mask or a helmet on, when they see something being swung at their head, will go like this, or that. Okay? They will naturally move their head, duck their head, or try and move it out of the way of the incoming blow. Now, if we're aiming at the top of the head and a person ducks, there's a very good chance that actually either you'll miss completely, or you might only really just skim the head and maybe then come down and hit the shoulder, which is not really a good thing. If you've actually managed to get through someone's defences or successfully parry their attack, and then you've managed to land an attack on their head, what a great shame that would be if it doesn't really do any damage. Okay? And a glancing blow with a sword that doesn't do a lot of blunt force trauma to the side of a head, glancing off a head, is not going to put a person out of action most of the time. You might cut them a bit, you might cause lots of bleeding, but they're still going to be conscious, they're still going to be trying to kill you. Okay? So, there's the two important points. Firstly, the head is very hard, Secondly, if you aim at the top of the head, a person can easily dodge it. Now, the historical evidence to say what to do. First of all, we have John Musgrave Waite in 1880 says to aim at the level of pretty much the eyes or downwards. Why? Two reasons, referring to the two reasons I've just given. One, from the eyes downwards is the most fragile part of the skull. Okay, we've got much thinner wall of the skull around the eye, around the ocular, around the eye socket. Then of course you've got cheekbone, jaws, and then you've got all of the veins down the neck, and your soft squishy neck, and a windpipe, and a spine. Okay, so everything from the eyebrows downwards is much more anatomically vulnerable and soft and squishy, and your sharp-edged weapon is more likely to have a greater effect on this part of the body than it will do on this. Secondly, you can't really dodge with that part of the head. If something's coming in, even if it's a downwards blow, which it normally would be, a downwards blow at this eye height or lower, it doesn't really matter which direction I move the head, forwards, sideways, backwards anyway, I'm still going to catch a cut somewhere. Okay, not like if I aim for the eye upwards. Really that's the point. And this, I would say, the evidence in that you could look from a medieval source point of view. If you look in Fiore de Liberi description of the cuts, he describes the fendente, the downwards cuts, coming in at the temple. Okay, at the temple height and downwards through the body that way. That's the direction they take, through the temple. When he describes the upwards cuts, he says they exit out through the teeth. Okay, so it's actually talking about this portion of the head that they're entering at, not the top of the head. Last bit of evidence, I'll go back to John Musgrave Waite. He notes that number 7 cut, which was directly down the middle here, was pretty much abandoned in Victorian sabre fencing because soldiers, officers, all sorts of different troops wore headwear, and often a helmet or a bearskin hat or a feather bonnet or whatever, and a straight down cut on the top was often just stopped by the headwear that the person was wearing, whereas a cut diagonally in at the sides would come below the level of the headwear that they were wearing. Okay, and I think, really going back to the beginning of what I was saying, the reason why we see so many downwards cuts given at the top part of the head is because in sparring it's the easy thing to hit, it's safe. If you know, maybe people in reenactment are used to only, if they're allowed to do headshots at all, they're probably only allowed to do headshots that come straight down on the helmet, ironically because they're the safest to do, because it's the bit best protected by a helmet. Which of course in martial arts is the opposite of what you want to do. You want to hit the bit that's most vulnerable, not the bit that's most easy to protect. So there we go. If you're practicing cutting at people's heads in a martial arts sense, my opinion is you should be aiming with any of the cuts, but including the downwards cuts, at eyebrow, kind of eye level and downwards. Stop aiming at the top of the head. Okay, thank you.